Hello everyone. So yesterday I started with Economic Survey 2020-2021, the document of Ministry of Finance, Government of India. So I completed volume 1, unit 1 and 2. Approximately it took 50 minutes yesterday. You can watch the video in the YouTube channel in the playlist of Economic Survey. And today I am going to discuss, in this session I am going to discuss about unit number 3 and 4 of volume 1, and there will be another session parallelly whereby I will be discussing about unit number 5 and 6 of volume number 1. So by tomorrow I will be completing the total volume 1 which is necessary for the examination point of view and overall important points for the sake of which an UPSC aspirant need to know about Economic Survey of India. So today I am going to discuss about unit number 3, and the unit number 3 mainly talks about sovereign credit rating agencies. Sovereign credit rating agencies. You know, the sovereign credit rating agencies play a major role. You have to know about it. Sovereign credit rating agencies, they determine, they give rating for the countries based upon their performance in the economy, based upon the performance on the economy. What are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, how the ease of doing business is there, how the investment environment is there. Basically the most important credit rating agencies will be studying about their debt status. So when we are going to give loan to that particular country, whether they will be repaying back or not, that will be studied by the sovereign credit rating agencies. So sovereign credit rating agencies mainly studies about the capacity of the country to pay back the loans, and the capacity of the country to generate profits for the investments will be studied by the sovereign credit rating agencies. And this sovereign credit rating agencies, some of the examples are Standards and Poor's, Fitch, Moody's. These are some of the very famous credit rating agencies. So this unit deals about, does India's sovereign credit rating reflect its fundamentals? So whether really the rating which is given by this sovereign credit rating agencies, the rating which is given by these sovereign credit rating agencies is really the valid, is really foolproof, is really worth following it, we will be studying in this particular Economic Survey document, unit number 3 of volume 1. So here in this context, what Rabindranath Tagore told, when the mind is without fear and the head is led high into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake. Yes, be brave. So every unit the slogan, this quotations were being given in the Economic Survey which replicates the intention, mood of the unit. So mood of the unit is, yes, whatever may be the rating given by the Standards and Poor's or Moody's or Fitch, we are going to hold our head high into the heaven of freedom. Let the country awake, whatever may be the rating, we are going to perform well, we are going to move forward is a meaning which is hidden in this. Why? Because these credit rating agencies are undermining the rating of India. The debt rating has been undermined, the investment rating has been undermined. In this context, the unit plays a major role. The chapter reflects bias against emerging giants in sovereign credit ratings. Yes, I told you, those sovereign credit rating agencies like Standards and Poor's, Moody's and Fitch, these are the 3 major credit rating agencies in the world. So this unit is totally against this giant credit rating agencies, a bias against emerging giants. So now this unit is against the ratings which are given by this sovereign credit rating agencies like Standards and Poor's, Moody's and Fitch. Sovereign credit rating map the probability of default and therefore reflect the willingness and ability of borrowers to meet its debt obligations. So 2 things it will be giving majorly, whether the country is going to be defaulted or whether the country is in a position to pay back the debt, mainly external commercial borrowings. So with the external commercial borrowings, whether the country is going to pay back it or whether country is going to be defaulted will be given by this. Based upon the rating it will be determined. When favorable, this can be facilitate countries' access to global capital markets and foreign investments, as I told you. So global capital market, foreign investments, foreign loans, external borrowings depends upon this rating. So how we will be watching the movies based upon the reviews of some of the websites. Similarly, the foreign countries will be investing and borrowing to the country based upon the ratings which is given by this sovereign companies, sovereign rating agencies. Sovereign credit rating broadly rate countries as either investment grade or speculative grade. Investment grade means yes, you can put investment in that country. Or speculative grade, there is a speculation that this country is going to be defaulted. So two grades will be provided by this credit rating agencies. One is called as investment grade, other is called as speculative grade. Investment grade means yes, this country is performing well with respect to economy, so we can put investment in this country, that is investment grade. And speculative grade means there is a speculation that the country, the probability of the country to be defaulted is high. With the later projected to, later means speculative grade projected to have higher likelihood of default on borrowings. So speculative grade means remember that it's a high likelihood that the borrowings is going to be defaulted, that is speculative grade. Whereas investment grade means yes, the country can be invested, in that country we can invest. The bias against emerging gains in sovereign credit ratings. Credit ratings map the probability of default and therefore reflect the willingness and ability of borrowers to meet its obligations. Economic Survey 2020 and 2021 argues that never in the history of sovereign credit ratings has the fifth largest economy in the world been rated as the lowest rung in the investment grade. Yes, the fifth largest economy in the world was been rated BBB or Baa3, which is the lowest in terms of the grading, which is being called as speculative grade. Reflecting the economic size and thereby the ability to repay debt, the fifth largest economy, India, has been predominantly rated AAA earlier, but now it is been rated as BBB and Baa3. India is rated BBB or Baa3, which is the lowest possible rating for a security to be considered investment grade. So we are being not considered as the investment grade, we are being considered as a speculative grade according to the economic survey. So the economic survey want to tell that we are the fifth largest economy and the rating agencies are downgrading us, because of which the mood, the sentiment of the market is getting affected, because of which the investments are coming down and we are becoming a speculative grade. Without our economic performance, without the downturn, there is a speculation in the market that the country can be defaulted, which is the false according to the economic survey. For example, if you see here, see in 2019-2020 we were being rated as Baa. Moody's, red mark, red color is Moody's, and Standard & Poor is violet color. This is also showing the same. Both are in the rank of Baa3. But once upon a time we were in AAA. See, consistently we were in AAA. Once upon a time we fallen down because of the world recession, entry of China in top 5 economies. Then again we evolved, again it fallen down. Now we are showing, because of the corona times by 2020, it is being shown as BBB or Baa. So BBB is Standard & Poor and Baa3 is Moody's and S&P. So with both we are being underrated. So because of which the investments are not coming into India, because of which when we are going for external borrowings also, the other countries or other players are not trusting us in the format of giving loans to us. That is what. India's sovereign credit, the anomaly in sovereign credit rating has continued for India. India's sovereign credit rating downgrades during 1998-2018 are mainly confined to the 1990s on account of the post-Pokhran sanctions in 1998. India's sovereign credit ratings upgrades have mainly been witnessed in the second half of 2000s. Yes, second half of 2000s. In recognition of higher economic growth prospects and strengthened fundamentals of the Indian economy, Indian economy grew at an average rate of over 6% and at approximately 8% in several years during this period. Still, India's high rate of economic growth coexisted with a sovereign credit rating of speculative growth is something which is a paradox. We are having a high economic growth, at the same time we are also being determined as a speculative grade, which is a paradox for the Indian economy. So if you see how we rated, we had once upon a time we are BB plus, Baa, BB plus, Now we are at the least by June 2020 Baa3. There are two colors. If you see, this is red in color and this is green in color. If you see, green highlights upgrade, whereas red indicates downgrade, and whereas black indicates first rating. But if you see, in 2003 to 2020 we were being downgraded. In 2020 we have been downgraded. Means what signals it is sending to the world market? This sovereign credit rating agencies are sending the signals to the world market that India is underperforming. India is underperforming. India is in a speculative grade, so it is not advisable to put investment in India. It is not advisable to give loans to India. This is what this credit rating agencies is there. In this context, the economic survey has criticized this sovereign credit agencies that we are performing well in spite of the corona times, but you are downgrading it. See, credit rating agencies scale comparison with some major CRAs. Highest quality AAA, AAA, and whereas worst performing, if you see, we are at Baa3, means adequate payment capacity. We are the last, likely to fulfill obligations and going uncertain. So we are likely to go uncertain. Afghanistan is C and D. Bankruptcy or default. Greece once upon a time reached the C also. Bankruptcy or default. So these are the various ratings with respect to Fitch, S&P and Moody's. Does India's sovereign credit rating actually reflects its fundamentals? India's sovereign credit ratings do not reflect its fundamentals. The India Economic Survey is telling that the rating which is given by the sovereign credit rating agencies is not reflecting its fundamentals. It's not reflecting its fundamentals. Within its sovereign credit ratings cohort, countries rated A+, A1, BBB, B3 for S&P. Moody's, India is a clear negative outlier on several parameters. A negative correlation is observed between sovereign credit ratings and consumer price index inflation across India's sovereign credit ratings cohort. In both the cases, India can clearly be seen as a negative outlier, that is, it's currently rated much below expectations for its level of GDP growth and CPI inflation. So, in spite of we are having a very good robust GDP growth till 2019 and controlled inflation, but still this credit rating agencies has been downgraded our rating. That is what the concern of the Economic Survey of India. Does India's sovereign credit rating reflects its willingness and ability to pay? India's willingness to pay is unquestionably demonstrated through its zero sovereign default history. We don't have one also. We till date in our history, we doesn't have any one event where we defaulted. So in spite of zero history, how they are downgrading our credit rating is questionable according to the Economic Survey. Within India's sovereign credit ratings cohort, India is rated much below expectation for its number of sovereign defaults since 1990, making it a negative outlier. So you are telling that India is in speculative grade, by which you are making a negative stand on India, but if we doesn't have any history where we got defaulted, then how you can do Economic Survey is questioning this sovereign credit rating agencies. India's sovereign external debt as percent of GDP stood at a mere 4% as of September 2020. With respect to our GDP, for example, our GDP is 100 rupees, our loans is only 4 rupees. Means out of 100 rupees, only 4 rupees is our loan, then it's good. When compared to the BRICS countries, when compared to the G20 countries, when compared to the OECD countries, India is in a very safe position. Then why you are underrating our sovereign credit is questioned by the Economic Survey. India's sovereign foreign denominated debt is met through India's foreign exchange reserves, and that 4% also we can pay back by our foreign exchange reserves. That means we are having enough cushion also. We are having enough cushion also. On what basis you are underrating our ratings? This is another question posed by the Economic Survey. India's non-government short-term debt as percentage of forex reserves stood at 19% as of September 2020. As shown by stress test estimate, India's forex reserves can cover an additional 2.8 standard deviation negative. So, as shown by the stress test estimates, India's foreign exchange reserves can cover an additional an additional 2.8 standard deviation negative, we are in a position, we are having that much robust foreign exchange reserve that another additional 2.8% debt also we are being in a position to address it. Then why you are underrating? These are the substantiative evidences which are being put forward by the economic survey and questioning the sovereign debt crisis. We are stronger, then why you are underrating us? Effect of sovereign credit rating changes on select indicators. Short-term effect of India's sovereign credit rating. Census return on average fell. Exchange rate on average appreciated. Census return on average fell. Exchange rate on average depreciated. Yield on government securities or average yield. Long-term effect. Census return, exchange rate and FPI in the long term. Averaged cross downgrade episodes from 1998 to 2018. On average, census return rose and average exchange rate depreciated on average. So these are some short-term effect of India's sovereign debt crisis. Medium-term effects and long-term effects are also we are facing because of the downgrading of sovereign debt crisis. Macroeconomic indicators as determinants of sovereign credit changes. There is no or weak correlation between episodes of sovereign credit ratings changes and select physical and macroeconomic indicators of India. It may be seen that during years of India's sovereign credit rating changes, the average performance of macroeconomic indicators was better than or similar to the previous years. Macroeconomically also we are stronger. Then why you are underrating us? This is the question which is put forward by the policy implications. The survey questioned whether India's sovereign credit ratings reflects its fundamentals. It found evidence of a systemic underassessment of India's fundamentals as reflected in its low ratings over a period of at least 2 decades. So we are systemically we are underrated. That is what which is questioned by the economic survey. Well, sovereign credit ratings do not reflect the India's economy's fundamental, noisy, opaque and biased credit ratings can affect equity and debt FPI flows, foreign portfolio investment flows of developing countries, causing damage and worsening the crisis. So this is negative thing. So the economic survey is criticizing the sovereign credit rating agencies. You are categorically, systemically, you are destroying the Indian economy. That is what which is questioned by the economic survey of India. Sovereign credit ratings methodology must be amended to reflect economy's ability and willingness to pay their debt obligations by becoming more transparent and less subjective. Don't analyze more. Be transparent, be clear. The pro-cyclical nature of credit ratings and its potential adverse impact on economies, especially low-rated developing economies, must be expeditiously addressed. Mainly, your approach of pro-cyclical nature of credit means when economy is flourishing, don't think that they will be paying back the loans. They will be paying back the debt. So we are following the counter-cyclical. When we are not performing, we are increasing our government expenditure and we are decreasing our tax so that the engine of the economy will be running and obviously we will be paying back the loans. Obviously we will be taking the debt. In that way, the government want to address this downgrading of the sovereign debt crisis. This is the second unit. So major crux point, most important point of the unit number 2 is the sovereign credit rating agencies like Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Fitch are systemically destroying the standards or the ratings or the rank of India in the world economies. We are not in a position to be downgraded as speculative grade, but this Standard & Poor's, Moody's were being designating India as a speculative grade, which is not true. We are having enough cushion. The GDP to debt ratio is very less. We are having robust foreign exchange reserves. We are in no position to be defaulted, but the speculations were been made that the speculations are giving by this credit rating agencies that India will be getting defaulted soon. Hence, the economic survey, the government of India is against the sovereign credit rating agencies. That is the summary of the. And the next unit is unit number 4. The next unit is unit number 4. And the unit number 4 mainly talks about inequality and growth, conflict or convergence. Yes. Conflict means both are divergent, or convergence means both are coming together. Inequality and growth. Yes. Chapter 4. Poverty is the parent of revolution and crime. Aristotle. Yes. You know, for any revolution in the world happened, poverty is the genesis. For any crime which is happening in the society, poverty is the initiator. Because of the poverty there is crime. Because of the poverty there is revolution. So how to address this poverty is important. Whether poverty is a serious problem or inequality is a serious problem, we will be discussing in India's economic context. This chapter shows the relationship between inequality and socio-economic outcomes like poor literacy, poor health factors. These are socio-economic indicators. Vis-a-vis economic growth and socio-economic outcomes is different in India from that observed in advanced economies. So how our economy is performing, similarly our socio-economic outcomes will be happening, but which is not the case with other countries. That comparison we will be doing here. So whether with the growth in the economy, poverty is reducing, whether with the growth in the economy, inequality is reducing, whether with the growth in the economy, health indicators are increasing, educational indicators are increasing, that we are understanding in this particular unit 4. So previous economic survey 2019-20 argued that ethical wealth creation by combining the invisible hand of market with the hand of trust, there should be a hand of trust, provides the way forward for India to develop economically. An often repeated concern expressed with the economic model pertains to inequality. Some commentary, especially in advanced economies post the global financial crisis, argues that inequality is no accident but an essential feature of capitalism. Inequality is an essential feature of capitalism. What is that? Haves will be becoming haves, have-nots will be becoming have-nots. The inequalities will be increasing between the capitalists and the laborers. The inequalities will be increasing between the rich and the poorer. Yes, economy is growing, but only one section is growing, another section is not growing. That is called as inequality. Some commentaries thus highlight a potential conflict between economic growth and inequality. There will be conflict. If economic growth is happening, inequality should come down, but inequality is not coming down. How economic growth is happening? Parallelly, inequality is also happening. So there is a conflict. Inequality, haves is have-haves, have-nots is have-nots. The significant reduction in poverty that high economic growth has delivered in India and China presents the most striking challenge to this notion of conflict between economic growth and the significant reduction in poverty that high economic growth has delivered in India and China presents the most striking challenge to this notion of conflict between economic growth and inequalities. Survey examines if inequality and growth conflict or converge in Indian context. By examining the correlation of inequality and per capita income with a range of socio-economic indicators including health, education, life expectancy, infant mortality, birth and death rates, fertility, crime, drug usage, mental health, the survey highlights that both economic growth as reflected in the income per capita at the state level and inequality have similar relationship with socio-economic indicators. Means similarity. When the economy is growing, the inequality is growing. But it should not happen. Economy is growing, GDP is growing, per capita income is growing means only few sections economy should not grow, all the sections of the economy should be growing. So what is happening here is there is a conflict between the economic growth and the inequality. As the economic growth is increasing, inequality is. Unlike in advanced economies in India, economic growth and inequality converge in terms of their effects on socio-economic indicators. Data reveals economic growth has a far greater impact on poverty alleviation than inequality. But in India, there is a good thing is there. In India, what is happening means this economic growth is resulting in reduction in the poverty. Yes, this economic growth has reduction in the poverty. But what is happening in the advanced economies? The economic growth is because there is a divergence between, there is a conflict between the economic growth and the inequality. But in India, what is happening? With economic growth, there is a convergence. Convergence means uniformity with the poverty. With economic growth, the poverty is getting reduced. Advanced economies may choose to focus on alleviating inequality given their stage of development, their potential rate of economic growth and absolute levels of poverty that they face. Thus, they may resolve the trade-off between growth and inequality by leaning towards alleviating inequality. So, whereas in advanced economies, with economic growth, inequality is increasing. So that means economic growth is unable to address inequality, but in India, economic growth is able to address the poverty. That is what which is clear. When we are addressing poverty means slowly inequality is reducing, but it is not the case with the advanced economies. There is lot of distinction. That is the reason, the crime in USA is exponentially higher than India. People will, yes, this is the fact. The crime rate in United States of America is exponentially higher than India because there is a lot of inequalities between haves and have-nots. According to their poverty estimates, our poverty estimates is different, their poverty estimates is different. But there the inequality is very large. But in India, with economic growth, we are also addressing the. However, despite facing the same trade-off, the policy objective of focusing on inequality may not apply in the Indian context given the difference in the stage of development, India's high potential rate of economic growth and the higher absolute levels of poverty. In India, economic growth and inequality converge in terms of their effects on socio-economic. In India, with higher economic growth, we are addressing the poverty. Eventually, we are addressing the inequality. But majorly, the poverty alleviation is happening. The development of the poverty is happening in India. A good sign. Growth, inequality and socio-economic outcomes, India versus advanced. Across Indian states, it is observed that both inequality and income per capita correlate similarly with socio-economic outcomes. Inequality across Indian states is measured as a Gini coefficient of consumption. Index of health outcomes correlates positively with both inequality and income per capita across the Indian states. Opposite of advanced economies, inequality and growth converge in their effects on health among Indians. Whereas coming to education, life expectancy, education, infant mortality, crime also show convergence of effects of inequality and growth among Indian states with respect to these indicators. On mental health, the data shows that effects of inequality and income per capita remain similar across the Indian states and the advanced economies. So with the economic growth, we are addressing the poverty. Eventually, we are addressing the inequality, which is not the case with advanced economies. Where birth and fertility rates decline with inequality and income per capita. Why? Because I am earning money. When I am earning money, earlier I used to think that when I have more children, I can do more work with my children. So I can produce more income. Income means for the sake of economic subsistence, for food. So when I am poor, I will be producing more children will be producing more food, so economic subsistence is satisfied. At the same time, when I am rich, I am not suffering with any economic disparities, deprivations, so I will produce only less children. So my fertility rate, when I am rich, the fertility rate will be less. The same thing is explained here. While birth and fertility rates decline with inequality and income per capita, but death rates do not correlate with either inequality or income per capita. The relationship with the two types of inequality in Indian state, that is inequality in the ownership of assets and inequality in the consumption, measured by the Gini coefficient based of assets, and inequality of consumption measured by the consumption based Gini coefficient, suggests a weak positive relationship between the two inequalities in India, implying that the states with greater consumption inequality are the ones facing greater asset inequality as well. Inequality of consumption is what matters the most rather than inequality of assets or inequality of income. The permanent income hypothesis posits that individuals and households attempt to smooth their consumption over time by borrowing or saving. Thus, while the income of an individual varies from year to year, consumption is more permanent as individuals tend to smooth their consumption over time. That is called as permanent income hypothesis. Simple. My consumption, my expenditure in the future depends upon my permanent income hypothesis. How much income I can expect in the future, based upon that my savings, and based upon that my expenditure will be there. For example, for another 10 years it is a guaranteed that I will be earning 50,000 per month. Then compulsory I will take housing loan. Then compulsory I will take car loan. So it is based upon the permanent income hypothesis in the future. But if I don't have any permanency, then I cannot take the loan. So my expenditure also will not be happening. Why? Because it doesn't have the permanent income. That is called as permanent income hypothesis. Posit that individuals and households attempt to smooth their consumption over time by borrowing or saving. Where the income of an individual varies from year to year, consumption is more permanent as individuals tend to smooth their consumption over. The permanent income is a theory of consumer spending stating that people will spend money at a level consistent with their expected long-term average income in the future. Measures of calculated income do not take into consideration all the available resources that result into well-being. Further, savings and borrowings practices vary across the income groups as the propensity to save is typical higher among the rich than among the poor. Therefore, inequality of income does not reflect the true inequality that individuals and households as consumers encounter. In the context of inequality, the divergence in assets among the rich and poor do not necessarily correlate strongly with the divergence in correlation between socio-economic indicators and inequality are robust irrespective of the measure of inequality used and across different time periods. Is perfect equality optimal? Inequality in income per capita do not diverge, do not conflict in their relationship with socio-economic outcomes in India. Now it is worth asking, is perfect equality optimal? What is that? Perfect equalization of outcomes ex post means based upon the facts. Perfect equalization of outcomes, that is after the efforts have been exerted to obtain those outcomes, can reduce individuals' incentives for work, innovation and wealth creation. In most cases, inequality of opportunity is much more objectionable than inequality. As individuals, opportunities are influenced by endowments that are related to parents and other adults and a variety of chance occurrence throughout their lifetimes. Yes. Inequality of opportunities is much more objectionable. Why? Means opportunities should be equal to everyone. But in India, what will happen? The opportunity depends upon the parents, depends upon where you took your birth. It depends upon. So inequality of opportunities is much more objectionable than inequality. Yes. With respect to opportunity, there should not be inequality. Everyone should have the equal opportunity. That is what the economic survey is telling, which is called as perfect equality optimal. For a developing country such as India, where the growth potential is high and the scope for poverty reduction is also significant, a policy that lifts the poor out of poverty by expanding the overall pie is preferable as redistribution only feasible if the size of the economic pie grows rapidly. Yes. Poverty can be reduced if and only if the economy grows. Without the growth of the economy, we cannot expect the poverty to be lessened and inequality to be lessened in the developing countries like India. So the only mantra is economic growth. Inequality refers to the degree of dispersion in the distribution of assets, income or consumption differences. Poverty refers to the assets, income or consumption of those at the bottom of the distribution. Poverty could be conceptualized in relative terms or in absolute terms. A relative measure of poverty is indeed a measure of inequality. This person is having, this person is not having, inequality. So relative poverty is nothing but an example of a relative poverty. If poverty is conceptualized in absolute one, that is focusing on the absolute levels of, if you have this much enough, you are not poor. If you don't have this, you are poor. So absolute levels of assets, income or consumption of those at the lower end of the distribution, then increases in inequality may be accompanied by reduction in poverty. Feldstein disagrees with the common reaction of the popular press and academic discussion that regards inequality and not poverty as a problem. He postulates that policy should aim at addressing poverty rather than, whereas this person, Feldstein, want to tell that first address poverty. When you address poverty, automatically inequalities will be reduced. So higher focus should be given on poverty. Absolute poverty should be of greater concern than inequality according to this Feldstein, economist. Of course, it is possible that if the incomes of the rich pull too far away from the rest of the society, growing frustration may lead to rising crime, withdrawal from civic engagement and loss of social cohesion. But in India's case, these concerns are minimal. But in India, what is happening? We are addressing the poverty by the economic growth. We are addressing the poverty by the economic growth. By addressing the poverty, the inequalities are also getting reduced. Mainly, I am talking with respect to economical inequality. Economical inequalities are getting addressed by what? Poverty elevation. So first importance should be given to the poverty elevation. Automatically the inequalities will be addressed according to the economic survey. This is the conclusion of the. Thank you. The next video will be of unit 5 and 6 of volume 1. Thank you. All the best.